All right, so are you ready to really boost those English speaking skills of yours?
Let's do it.
We've got a fantastic deep dive lined up today, all based on a podcast episode called 5 Ways to Improve Your English Speaking Skills.
And you know what? I actually think this one's got some really great stuff in it.
Oh, yeah. Some of these techniques are seriously going to surprise you.
Totally. And what I found super interesting is that it's not just, surface level advice.
Uh-huh.
It gets into the real, nitty-gritty
Oh, wow.
of, the cognitive science behind becoming fluent.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah. So we're going to be diving deep today, starting with that.
Awesome. So let's jump right in with the first tip, and it's think in English.
Okay.
I got to admit, I've heard this advice a lot, but honestly, it's always felt kind of vague.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you actually do that?
Right. Well, and that's what I really liked about this podcast episode is they actually give some pretty specific advice.
Okay.
They explain that it's not just about avoiding direct translation. It's about rewiring your brain to process the world in English. So imagine instead of translating the word apple in your head every time you see one,
Right.
you just instantly picture the fruit itself. Like apple becomes synonymous with the image.
I see. So you're kind of creating shortcuts in your brain,
Exactly. Yeah.
bypassing that extra step.
Yeah, you're cutting out the middleman.
So interesting. So how do we actually train our brains to do that?
Well, the podcast has some pretty clever tactics. One of them is to start labeling objects around your house with English words.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, like you could literally put sticky notes on your furniture. It might feel a little silly at first,
Okay.
but you're basically immersing your brain in the language.
Right. Even when you're just like at home making dinner.
Exactly.
Wow.
It's about making English a part of your everyday environment.
Oh, and I remember they also mentioned something about changing your phone settings to English.
Oh, that's a great one.
Right.
I mean, think about it. You use your phone 1,000,000 times a day,
Oh, yeah.
and suddenly all those menus and notifications are in English.
Yeah. You're constantly being exposed to it.
Yeah.
I tried that once and I felt like I was using a phone for the first time. It was so disorienting.
Right.
But I did learn some new vocabulary.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about embedding English into your daily routine in ways you might not even realize.
Yeah, subtly.
Yeah, exactly. The more you expose your brain to the language, the more naturally it'll start thinking in English.
It's like tricking your brain.
A little bit,
I
yeah.
love it. Okay, so moving on to the next technique, and this one is one of my personal favorites. It's called shadowing.
Oh, yeah, shattering. That's a good one.
Have you tried this one?
I have. It's so much fun.
It's so cool. And it's basically about mimicking native speakers, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the podcast describes it as listening to a native speaker. It could be from anything like a podcast or a TED Talk or even a scene from your favorite Netflix show.
Oh, fun.
And you try to replicate not just the words, but like the intonation, the rhythm, the pauses, everything.
It's really about the music of the language.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what makes it so effective because you're not just learning words, you're learning how to use your voice.
Right. Like a musical instrument.
Exactly.
I love it. But isn't there a risk of just sounding like a parrot?
That's a good question. And the podcast actually addresses that. They say it's important to choose speakers you admire,
Okay.
voices that resonate with you. So it's not about copying their personality, but rather absorbing the musicality of their speech.
I see. So it's more about like the overall flow and the feeling.
Exactly. Yeah. And how they use their voice to convey emotions and ideas.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So it's like learning from the masters.
Exactly.
I remember trying this with a speech by Steve Jobs.
Oh, wow.
I was just blown away by his charisma and how he captivated the audience. So I would pause the video every few sentences and try to mimic not just his words, but like his energy, his tone.
That's awesome.
It was really challenging, but so much fun.
Yeah. And what's cool about shadowing is it forces you to pay attention to the subtleties of pronunciation that we often miss.
Yeah.
Like you start noticing the nuances of connected speech, the way sounds blend together.
It trains your mouth to make those sounds.
Totally. Like a workout for your pronunciation muscles.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
And speaking of pronunciation, the podcast also mentions something really interesting about tongue twisters.
Oh, yeah. Those are classics.
Right. They're not just for kids?
No, they're actually a brilliant way to target specific sounds that you might struggle with.
Oh, that's a good point.
Like take the classic one, she sells seashells by the seashore.
Yeah.
It forces you to practice those S and she sounds repeatedly.
Right. So it's like isolating a muscle group at the gym.
Exactly. You're zeroing in on those sounds that trip you up.
Okay, I'm ready for a tongue twister challenge.
Right, let's do it. How about this one? How much wood would a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood?
Oh my goodness. Okay, wait. How much wood would a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood?
Oh, Oh, man. I think I need to practice that one.
It's a tough one.
It's harder than it looks.
It is. But, speaking of practice, that brings us to our next big tip.
All right, let's hear it.
And it's all about speaking out loud and doing it every single day.
Yes, practice, practice, practice.
It's like playing an instrument or learning a new sport. You got to put in the time.
Absolutely. It's all about building those muscle memories.
So true. And what I really appreciate about this podcast is that they encourage you to think beyond traditional conversation practice.
Yeah. Like, what else can we do?
Right. They suggest things like reading aloud,
Oh, that's a good one.
even if it's just a news article or a chapter from a book.
Right.
So you're training your mouth to articulate those sounds without even needing a conversation partner.
Exactly.
That's so helpful.
Yeah. And they also have this brilliant tip about recording yourself speaking,
Oh, yeah.
which might feel a little awkward at first.
Totally.
But listening back to your own voice allows you to pinpoint areas where you might be stumbling or where your pronunciation needs work.
It's like having your own personal language coach.
Yeah.
I've tried this before, and honestly, it was eye-opening. I realized I had a tendency to speak way too fast
Oh, really?
and mumble certain words.
Yeah, we all have our little quirks.
It's so true. But it's like once you're aware of them, you can start to work on them.
Exactly. It's all about self-awareness.
Yeah. And the podcast even suggests keeping a mistake journal,
Oh, that's interesting.
like jotting down words or phrases that you consistently mispronounce or grammatical structures that you're struggling with.
So you're turning your mistakes into stepping stones.
Exactly. Instead of feeling embarrassed by them, you're like tracking your progress and identifying where you need to focus.
I love that approach. It's so positive.
Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about the social side of language learning.
Yep.
Because you can only practice talking to yourself for so long.
Right. You got to get out there.
And the podcast really emphasizes the importance of joining English-speaking community.
Oh, for sure. There's nothing quite like real-life practice.
Yeah. And I think this is where a lot of language learners hit a roadblock.
What do you mean?
It's that fear of making mistakes in front of others.
Oh, yeah, that can be so intimidating.
Right. And it holds people back from actually speaking.
Yeah, I get that.
But the podcast addresses this head on. They remind us that mistakes are not failures. They're feedback.
That's such an important point.
Every time you stumble or hesitate, you're actually learning something valuable about your strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, it's all about reframing that fear and
Yeah.
seeing it as an opportunity for growth.
And what's so great about English-speaking communities, whether they're online forums or local conversation groups,
Yeah.
everyone is there for the same reason.
So learn and support each other.
Exactly. So you're not alone in those feelings of vulnerability.
It's a safe space to practice and make mistakes.
The podcast mentions some cool apps like Tandem and Hello Talk.
Oh, yeah, those are great for finding language partners.
It's like having a pen pal, but for speaking practice.
Exactly. And you can connect with people from all over the world.
And there are also tons of online communities dedicated to specific interests, like movies or books or music.
Oh, that's so cool. So you can connect with people who share your passions.
Exactly. And practice your English while you're talking about stuff you love.
It's like a win-win.
Speaking of connecting, this whole conversation reminds me of an experience I had a few years ago when I was traveling in Italy.
Oh, tell me about it.
I was determined to use my Italian as much as possible.
Good for you.
But I was at a cafe struggling to order a cappuccino,
Oh, I've been there.
and I could feel my face turning red with embarrassment.
We've all been there.
But then this kind woman next to me overheard my fumbling attempts and offered to help.
Ah, that's so sweet.
Not only did she help me order my cappuccino, but we ended up chatting for almost an hour, practicing our languages and sharing stories about our lives.
Wow, that's amazing.
It was a reminder that language learning is not just about memorizing grammar rules or vocabulary lists.
Yeah.
It's about connecting with people, sharing experiences, and embracing those moments of awkwardness and laughter that come with the territory.
So true. And sometimes those moments lead to the most meaningful connections.
It's so true.
Yeah.
Okay, so as we wrap up this first part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with a little challenge.
Okay, am I?
Think about how you can incorporate just one of these techniques. Think in English, shadowing, or speak out loud daily into your routine this week.
Yeah. Pick one and give it a try.
We'll be back soon to dive into even more tips from the podcast episode, 5 Ways to Improve Your English Speaking Skills.
Can't wait.
Stay tuned. Welcome back to our deep dive into improving your English speaking skills. We left off talking about the importance of speaking out loud daily.
It's such a key part of the process.
It really is. And you know what? The podcast episode actually had a really interesting take on the role of humor in language learning.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. They were saying that humor can actually help you learn more effectively.
Exactly. It's like when you can laugh at yourself and your mistakes.
Yeah.
It takes the pressure off.
Totally. And it makes the whole process more enjoyable.
It does. You're not so worried about being perfect all the time.
Right. And you're more open to experimenting and taking risks.
Exactly. And you know what? I think language-related jokes can be super insightful too.
Oh, totally. They often point out those little quirks and absurdities of different languages.
Yeah. Which actually helps you understand grammar and vocabulary better.
It's like learning through laughter.
I love it. This reminds me of a time when I was first learning French, and I was trying to impress my friend with my amazing French skills.
I sense a story coming.
Oh, yeah. So I confidently declared, "Je suis une pomme de terre," thinking I was saying I'm a potato, to be funny.
Oh, no.
And my friend just burst out laughing.
I bet.
And they explained that I had actually said I am a potato because apparently une pomme de terre is feminine.
Oh, right.
And the masculine form, pomme de terre, is used to refer to a man who is a bit boring.
Oh, that's hilarious.
It was so embarrassing, but I never forgot the difference between masculine and feminine nouns after that.
See, it's those moments that really stick with you.
They do. It's like the laughter cements the lesson in your brain.
Exactly. So don't be afraid to make mistakes and have a good laugh along the way.
Absolutely. Now, as we move into the home stretch of our deep dive,
Yeah.
I want to bring it back to something we touched on earlier, the idea of mindset.
Mindset is so important.
It really is. The podcast emphasizes the importance of having a positive and proactive approach to language learning.
It's not just about the techniques, it's about believing in your ability to learn.
Exactly. They talk about setting realistic goals,
Right.
breaking down those big, intimidating aspirations into smaller, more achievable steps.
And celebrating those small victories along the way.
Yes, acknowledge your progress and focus on the joy of learning.
Instead of getting bogged down by perfectionism.
I think this is especially crucial for anyone who's had negative experiences with language learning in the past.
Yeah, like if you struggled in a classroom setting or felt discouraged by a lack of progress.
It's about letting go of those past experiences
And approaching language learning with a fresh perspective.
with curiosity and playfulness.
Like you're a kid again discovering something new.
It's like learning to ride a bike.
Oh, I like that.
You might fall a few times, get scraped knees, but eventually, with practice and perseverance,
Like you find your balance.
you feel the wind in your hair and you experience that amazing sense of freedom.
It's a beautiful analogy, and it totally applies to language learning.
It does. It's about embracing those bumps along the way
Trusting the process.
and ultimately experiencing the pure joy of communicating in a new language.
Well said. And speaking of joy, that leads us perfectly into the final tip from the podcast.
Oh, yes. This one's all about immersion.
Tell me more.
It's about surrounding yourself with English as much as possible, making it part of your daily life.
So like creating a linguistic landscape where you're constantly encountering the language.
It's exactly, whether it's through music, movies, podcasts, or even just changing the language settings on your devices.
It's about making English a part of your life, not just something you study.
And the podcast really stresses the importance of finding ways to make immersion enjoyable.
Oh, that's key.
Like if you love music, listen to English songs and try to understand the lyrics.
If you're a movie buff, watch movies with English subtitles.
Or even try dubbing over your favorite scenes.
That sounds fun.
It is. It's about making English a part of your downtime, not just something you have to force yourself to do.
Right. And it doesn't have to be this huge, overwhelming thing.
No. Even small changes can make a big difference over time.
Absolutely. Start by incorporating 1 or 2 English activities into your daily routine.
Like listening to a podcast on your commute.
Or reading an English news article before bed.
Exactly. It's about finding those little pockets of time where you can immerse yourself in the language without feeling overwhelmed.
And as you get more comfortable, you can gradually increase your exposure.
Maybe challenge yourself to watch a movie without subtitles.
Or even strike up a conversation with a native English speaker.
It's a journey, not a destination.
And the beauty of immersion is that it allows you to discover the nuances and richness of the language in a way that feels natural and organic.
I love that. Now, before we wrap up this part as our deep dive, I want to circle back to something that really stood out to me from the podcast, the idea of finding your language learning tribe.
Oh, yes, the power of community.
It's so important. They
Uh,
emphasize that you don't have to do this alone.
Right. There's a whole world of language learners out there going through the same struggles and celebrating the same victories.
Exactly. And supporting each other every step of the way,
It's about finding your people.
whether it's through online forums, language exchange apps, or local conversation groups.
It's about creating a space where you can practice without judgment, ask questions, share resources, and celebrate each other's progress.
And you know what? Those connections can go way beyond language learning. They can lead to friendships, collaborations, and even new opportunities.
It's amazing how a shared passion for language can bring people together.
It really is. It's a reminder that language is not just a tool for communication.
It's a bridge that connects us to new cultures, new perspectives, and new possibilities.
So as we move on to the final part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought.
Okay, I'm listening.
Embrace the power of community.
I like that.
Find your tribe, support each other, and celebrate the journey together. Welcome back. It's amazing how much we've learned about improving our English speaking skills just from one podcast episode.
Yeah, it really shows you how much depth there is to this topic.
And it all ties together so well,
You know what I mean?
especially with that last point about community.
It's like that saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Exactly. Having that support system makes the learning process so much better.
Yeah. More fun and more effective.
It really does. You can share resources, celebrate wins, and even just laugh together when things get a little tough.
Oh, for sure. Which, speaking of, I remember when I first started learning English,
Oh, yeah?
I was so focused on being perfect.
Oh, tell me about it.
I was so afraid to make mistakes that
Yeah.
I barely spoke at all.
Oh, I know that feeling.
I'd spend hours studying grammar and vocabulary, but then I'd freeze up in conversations.
It's like we get so caught up in perfection that we forget what language is really about.
Yeah, it's about connecting with people,
Expressing ourselves.
even if it's not perfect.
And I think the podcast really nailed it when they said to embrace those imperfect moments.
Those stumbles and hesitations.
They're not failures, they're opportunities to grow.
It's like learning to dance.
Oh, I like that.
You're not going to get every step right away. There will be missteps, awkward moments, maybe even a few collisions on the dance floor.
But it's through those stumbles that you actually find your rhythm
You gain confidence.
and start to really enjoy the dance.
Exactly. So just let go of that fear of judgment and have fun with it.
I love that. And that's where the community aspect comes in.
Having that support system,
Makes such a difference. When you're surrounded by people who are all learning together,
you feel more comfortable taking risks
making mistakes,
and learning from each other.
it's like having a safety net.
You know that even if you stumble, you've got people there to catch you.
And it's amazing how those connections often extend beyond language learning.
Yeah, I've seen it happen.
People make friendships,
Collaborate on projects.
even travel together.
It's a reminder that language is more than just words.
It's a bridge that connects us to new cultures, new perspectives, and new opportunities.
I remember one time I was at an international conference and I was super nervous about networking,
Oh, yeah. Conferences can be intimidating.
especially when you're trying to make a good impression in a different language.
It can feel like a lot of pressure.
It was. But then I met this group of people who were also non-native English speakers.
Oh, nice.
And we just started chatting, sharing our experiences, and laughing about our language mishaps.
That sounds like...
It was. And honestly, I felt so relieved to be around people who understood the challenges.
and could celebrate the wins with you.
Yes. And you know what? I ended up making some of the most valuable connections at that conference, not with the fluent English speakers, but with the people who were on that same learning journey with me.
It's amazing how those shared experiences can bring people together.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's important to remember that improving your English speaking skills is a personal journey.
There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
The podcast episode we discussed gave us some great tips.
The roadmap.
But ultimately, it's up to each individual to find what works best for them.
To personalize that roadmap and discover their own path to fluency.
And remember, it's a journey, not a destination.
Embrace the challenges, celebrate the victories, and most importantly, enjoy the process.
Well said.
We've covered so much today, from practical techniques to the power of community and the importance of mindset,
I hope our listeners are feeling inspired.
to take their English-speaking skills to the next level.
Keep practicing, keep exploring, and keep believing in yourself.
And remember, you're not alone on this journey.
There's a whole community out there cheering you on.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time for another adventure in learning.
See you then.